wind moved slow across the empty hills that morning, carrying with it the sound of a baby crying from inside the small ranch house. The sound rose and fell like a wounded thing, breaking against the walls, spilling through the windows, and dying somewhere in the dry prairie air. Inside, John Mercer stood by the crib, eyes bloodshot from too many sleepless nights, shoulders bowed under the weight of something far heavier than the baby in his arms. He whispered low, voice hoarse, "Hush now, little man. Daddy's here." The child's cries only deepened, face red, small fists thrashing against the air. John rocked him, walked the floorboards bare, paced until the old boards creaked their protest. The scent of milk soured on the table, a half-drunk bottle beside it. Nothing worked. Not rocking, not singing, not holding him close. Samuel was inconsolable, and John, for all his strength, could not fix this simple hurt. The baby's mother would have known what to do. Clara always did. He could still see her, hair falling out of its braid as she laughed, one hand stirring the pot on the stove, the other swaying the baby in his cradle. She had a gentleness he didn't understand, something that made even hard soil bloom. But Clara was gone, taken by the fever that came through Hill Creek the winter before, gone before Samuel was even weaned. Since then, John had been learning what silence really meant. Silence except for the crying. He shifted the baby in his arms, moving toward the stove. The fire had burned low overnight, and the room felt cold enough to see his breath. He stoked the embers, poured water into a pan, and tried to heat another bottle. His hands, scarred and broad from years of roping cattle, fumbled with the tiny glass piece and the rubber nipple. The child wailed again, harder now. John closed his eyes and muttered, "Lord help me, I'm trying." The kettle hissed softly, and a thin ribbon of steam rose into the air. He tested the milk against his wrist like Clara used to, too cold. He waited, too hot. He waited again, and by the time he thought it was right, Samuel had cried himself into hiccups. John tried the bottle once more, guiding it to the baby's lips, but the child turned his head, mouth trembling in protest. A noise escaped John's throat, part sigh, part broken prayer. He sank into the wooden chair by the stove, clutching the child against his chest. Samuel's small body was warm, trembling. John stared at the flickering firelight on the wall, his mind wandering to that day at the churchyard, the wind tearing at his hat as he buried Clara beneath a sky too blue for morning. He'd promised her then, with a hand on her casket, that he'd take care of their son. But he hadn't known how hard taking care could be. By noon, the cries had dulled into weak whimpers, the baby exhausted. John wrapped him tighter in his blanket, humming tunelessly. He thought about calling the doctor again, but what would the man say? He'd already said his piece last month. Find a woman who can nurse him. That's what he needs, Mr. Mercer. A woman. John stared through the window at the empty land stretching to the horizon. There weren't many women left near the ranch. Most had moved closer to town or farther west with family. He thought about Mrs. Beckett, old and kind, but she'd just laugh and say her days of nursing were long past. The Johnson girl had a baby of her own, but lived 10 miles away. No, there wasn't anyone who could. A sharp knock came at the door. John startled, nearly dropping the child. He opened it to find Mary Ellen Turner standing on his porch. She was wrapped in a faded gray shawl, her dark hair pulled back but wind-tossed, her cheeks flushed from the walk. She wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something steady in her face, something that had seen sorrow and learned how to stand anyway. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," she said softly. "I heard the little one crying all the way down the creek road. Thought I'd bring you some bread." She lifted a small basket toward him. He nodded, eyes darting to the baby squirming against his chest. "That's mighty kind of you, Miss Turner. He's been loud this week." She tilted her head, eyes gentle. Babies cry, but not always without reason. She stepped closer, peering at Samuel. "How old?" "Almost 8 months. Still nursing age." He hesitated. The silence between them stretched long and awkward, filled only by the sound of Samuel's whimpering. Mary looked down, then spoke, her voice quieter now. "I lost my little girl not long ago. 3 months passed." Her eyes flickered, pain flashing like lightning across calm skies. "She was born too early. Never made it more than a few weeks." John's throat went tight. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." She nodded, breathing slowly. "I still have milk," she said simply, lifting her gaze to meet his. "If you'd let me, I could feed your boy, just for now, till he takes the bottle better." For a long moment, John said nothing. The offer hung in the air between them, so strange, so kind, so intimate. He wanted to say no, to protect what little pride he had left. But the baby in his arms whimpered again, weak and hungry. His heart clenched. "You'd do that for us?" he asked, voice low. "I would," she said, with a quiet conviction that left no room for doubt. No child should go hungry, and no man should have to face that alone. He stepped aside, gesturing her in. The warmth from the fire brushed her face as she entered. The house smelled faintly of hay, milk, and loneliness. She unwrapped her shawl, reached for the baby, and he handed Samuel to her with trembling hands. The moment she cradled him, he stopped fussing. Her touch was different, gentle, sure, calm. She hummed something low and melodic, a sound so soft it could have been mistaken for a prayer. Within moments, Samuel latched, quiet and content, his tiny hand resting against her arm. John stood there, motionless, watching the scene as though it were something sacred. The silence that filled the room wasn't heavy like before. It was peaceful, warm. Mary glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "He's a good boy," she whispered. "Just hungry? That's all." He swallowed hard. "Thank you, Mary." She smiled faintly, eyes lowered. "It's been a while since I held a baby. I'd forgotten how small they feel, how heavy they are when they sleep." When Samuel finally drifted into soft, steady breathing, she brushed a thumb across his cheek, as though remembering her own child. The tenderness of the gesture caught John in the chest like a blow. "He looks like you," she murmured. "He's got her eyes," John said quietly. The fire crackled softly, and neither spoke for a long while. When she rose to leave, the baby was still asleep. She handed him back, their fingers brushing for a moment. "If you need me again, Mr. Mercer," she said, meeting his eyes, "I'll be nearby." He wanted to thank her again, but no words came. She left before the light faded, walking down the dirt road toward her small cabin by the creek. John stood in the doorway. Samuel pressed close to his chest, watching her silhouette disappear into the gold of the evening sun. For the first time in months, the ranch was quiet. Not empty, just quiet, and somehow in that quiet hope began to breathe again. Morning came soft and golden over the hills, the sky painted in pale streaks of peach and blue. The Mercer ranch stirred slowly to life, hens scratching near the barn, the faint creak of the windmill spinning above the well, and somewhere inside the small house, the cry of a baby just waking. John Mercer sat at the kitchen table, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. When he heard the familiar knock on the door, he didn't need to ask who it was. Mary Ellen Turner stepped in, her shawl pulled tight against the early chill, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth under one arm. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," she said softly, eyes bright despite the faint weariness around them. "Morning, Miss Turner," he replied, standing to take the bread. "You didn't have to walk all the way out here again." She smiled faintly, setting down the basket she carried. "It's only a half-mile. Besides, he'll be hungry soon." At the sound of her voice, Samuel began to coo from his cradle in the corner. John glanced over, and for the first time in months, the baby's face wasn't twisted with tears. Instead, his small arms reached toward Mary, as if he already knew she brought comfort. Mary's smile deepened, the kind that warmed a room without needing words. "See, he remembers me," John chuckled quietly. "Reckon he does. Seems like he forgets everyone else soon enough, but not you." She crossed the floor, gathered the baby into her arms, and sat by the window where the morning light fell. Her motions were graceful, practiced, every movement gentle. She hummed under her breath, the same low tune she'd sung the first time she fed him, and Samuel nestled close, content. John watched her from across the room, hands resting on the edge of the table. There was something about her, quiet strength, a kind of peace that made even the air seem softer. It had been weeks since that first day she came, and every morning since, she'd arrived without fail. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes fresh milk or herbs, but always she brought calm. He'd told her she didn't have to. She'd only smiled and said, "I want to." Outside, the wind carried the smell of sage and the promise of spring. John moved to pour coffee into 2 tin mugs, then brought one to her. It's not fancy, but it's hot, he said. She accepted it with a nod, careful not to disturb the baby. You make it strong enough to wake the dead, she teased lightly. That's how I stay upright, he replied with a tired grin. They both laughed quietly. The baby stirred, then went still again. After a while, Mary looked up from the child, eyes soft. He's filling out. You're doing right by him, John? He stared at the floor for a moment before answering. It ain't me. It's you. You're the one keeping him fed. She shook her head. You're his father. That's more than half of it. He feels safe because you're near. The word struck something deep inside him, something he hadn't let himself feel since Clara died. He'd told himself he was failing, that every cry and sleepless night was proof he wasn't enough. But Mary's tone carried no pity, only quiet belief. He cleared his throat, setting his mug down. Mary, I never did thank you proper. She smiled faintly, eyes lowering. You don't have to. I do. You saved him. And you saved me too, though I doubt you meant to. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Mary brushed a strand of hair from her face, her voice soft when she spoke again. You don't need saving, John. You just needed someone to remind you you're still alive. The words lingered between them, heavy and tender all at once. Outside, clouds were gathering low over the hills. By afternoon, the rain began, a soft drizzle at first, then a steady downpour that turned the yard into mud. Mary stayed longer than usual, unable to walk home through the storm. John brought in more firewood and hung her shawl by the stove to dry. You sure you don't mind me staying? She asked as thunder rolled in the distance. He looked at her, the baby dozing in her arms. Mind? I can't remember the last time this house felt warm. She blushed slightly, looking down at Samuel. You say kind things you don't mean. I mean every word, he said quietly. They sat by the fire for hours while the rain drummed against the roof. Samuel slept, his tiny breaths even and soft. Mary hummed another lullaby, one he hadn't heard before. When the melody faded, she told him stories about her childhood back east, about her late husband, about the first time she'd seen the western sky and how it made her feel small and free at once. John listened, the sound of her voice filling places inside him that had long been empty. He found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone, about his first herd, his father's lessons, how Clara used to braid wildflowers into her hair when she worked in the garden. She loved lavender best, he said quietly, staring into the fire. After she passed, I couldn't stand the smell of it anymore. Now I think maybe I just missed it because it reminded me she was gone. Mary's eyes glistened. I understand that. They sat in silence, and in that silence, there was no awkwardness, just two people breathing the same quiet, finding comfort in being seen. As the evening deepened, Samuel stirred and whimpered softly. Mary shifted him against her shoulder, rocking gently. He's getting heavy, she whispered, a small smile playing on her lips. A good sign, John nodded. He's got your patience. You calm him faster than I ever could. She met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Maybe he just knows love when he feels it. He swallowed hard. Maybe his pa's starting to remember what that feels like too. The fire popped. Outside, the rain slowed to a steady whisper, the storm finally breaking apart. The room felt smaller somehow, filled with warmth and something new, something fragile but real. John stood, walked to the window, then turned back to her. Mary, I've been thinking, this can't go on like this forever. You come in every day, walking all that way through mud and wind. You've got your own place to tend. Her expression shifted, unsure. Are you asking me to stop coming? He shook his head quickly. No, ma'am. I'm asking if maybe you'd stay. The words hung there, naked and trembling. Mary's breath caught. Stay? He nodded slowly. Not just for the boy, for me, for us. You've turned this house from a grave into something living again. She stared at him, eyes shining in the firelight. John, I don't know if I can love again. Every time I've tried to dream, it feels like betrayal to the ones I lost. He stepped closer, his voice rough but tender. Maybe it ain't betrayal. Maybe it's healing. You gave my boy peace, Mary, but you gave me something else too. A reason to look forward instead of back. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached out, laying her free hand over his. If I stay, I'll need time to learn to smile without feeling guilty, to let hope in slow. He nodded. You take all the time you need. We got plenty of it here. Outside, the last of the rain stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and spring grass. The baby stirred once more, sighed, then went still again in her arms. John reached down, brushed a fingertip across his son's cheek, then looked at Mary with something close to awe. In that small, quiet house on the edge of the prairie, two broken souls found something the world rarely gives twice, a chance to begin again. The widowed rancher had searched for help for his crying baby, but what he found instead was a gentle neighbor whose milk stilled the child, and whose heart slowly mended his own.